This is East Carolina Offensive Coordinator Donnie Kirkpatrick. We are talking one of my favorite things, Pirate football, on the Sports Objective, the official, unofficial podcast of the Pirates.
On October 30th, the South Florida Bulls will be coming to Dowdy-Ficklen Stadium as East Carolina will take on Jeff Scott's ball club. And right now, to preview USF, I'm very excited to welcome back into the program the only play-by-play voice the Bulls have ever known, Jim Louk. Jim, how's your summer going?
Going good, thanks. I'm looking forward to football season.
Yeah, no doubt about it. It is here, as camp will be starting here in just a few days, as we were just discussing off the air. And, Jeff Scott, obviously not the results the Bulls wanted in year one, that goes without saying, but did play better in some areas as the year went on, had near misses against Temple and Memphis, and both of those games were on the road, and then played UCF very competitively in the season finale. So just talk about year one and anything, that may have transpired during the off season going into year two of Jeff Scott.
Well, year one was about the worst scenario you could have written up. Young first-time head coach gets exactly one practice in spring before things get shut down. He's got a young team. He's got new systems he's trying to bring in. And really, I think he probably would tell you that he took the field with that team last fall, still not knowing exactly what he had. By comparison, this year they've had a full and productive spring. He's had a full cycle recruiting class, and I think he's built a team with more depth and more physical talent than last year. I don't think there's any doubt they're going to be a better team this year, maybe dramatically so. The question is just how much is that going to translate to in the win-loss column, given how difficult their schedule is. But overall, I think there's a lot of optimism here that they're going in the right direction now.
Let's start with the offense. Obviously, you have North Carolina transfer Cade Fortin Jr. at quarterback. Tell us about him, and then we'll talk some of the skill pieces around him.
Well, quarterback was a problem last year, and Cade got a chance late in the season against Tulsa and just looked dynamic for about a series and a half. And then unfortunately had a shoulder injury that kept him out for the rest of the season. So he's definitely in the mix for this year. He'll be battling Jaren Williams, who was transferred in from the University of Miami, was the starting quarterback for the Hurricanes as a freshman a couple of years ago. I think those are the top two guys right now. Certainly a question who's one and who's two. But the wild card at quarterback is a true freshman left-hander named Timmy Mclean, who was just dynamic in the spring game, had a very good spring camp. Whether they're going to have plays for him and try to build some packages for him as a true freshman remains to be seen, but he's a guy that could see the field as soon as this year as well. So good news at quarterback. They certainly have more depth and more options, but now they've got to decide who that number one guy is.
At running back, Kelly Joyner had significant experience a year ago. Talk about him and some of the other options that any one of those signal callers and will be handing the ball to or getting it to in the passing game.
Well, Joyner definitely is a talented running back. He's got to work a little bit, quite frankly, on ball protection, but he's going to be in the mix, and he's a guy that can turn a game on one carry. He's that quick and that dynamic. Another guy that they're looking toward is Darian Felix, transfer from Oregon, who played last year but was just battling one injury after another and never really got untracked. He's a talented guy. I think will have a much more productive year. And Brian Battie, who as a true freshman had some really good moments last year, I think will be in the mix as well.
On paper, what I saw a few days ago, looking at one of the football preview magazines, it looks as though the Bulls are very fortunate to have a veteran offensive line. a lot of seniors there. Talk about some of those guys and what the offensive line looks like.
Yeah, the offensive line had their moments last year, but they probably weren't quite as consistent as they had hoped. You're right, though. It's all familiar names. The entire offensive starting line comes back intact, and that extends out to the tight ends for the most part as well. So they've got some great experience there, and that's probably both offensively and defensively where the Bulls need to show the most improvement is in line play. They need to have better play in the trenches this year.
You mentioned the defense. Taking a look at the defense last year within the American, surrendered an average of 43 points a game. Just looking up and down the roster, at least 6 Division I transfers brought in by Scott and this regime.
Yeah, last year they never generated much of a pass rush. They never put much pressure on the quarterback. Their run defense was inconsistent. And unfortunately, that put pressure on some of the other areas of the defense that were a little vulnerable as well. So defensive line has definitely been an area that they're trying to shore up. Jeff Scott, when he first came to USF, said that he's not the type of guy that likes to hit the transfer portal and likes to build through transfers. He'd rather have 4-year players and kind of build from freshmen on up. But the reality of this rebuild is that he doesn't have that luxury at the beginning of his tenure here. So he has come in and brought in some Power 5 transfers that hopefully will be able to help immediately, especially on the defensive side.
You have Antonio Greer back at linebacker. He was the leading tackler a season ago, also the leading sacks holder, and then interceptions. Daquan Evans, he had 3, and that led the Bulls a season ago, and he's back.
Yeah, there's some good veterans back. Greer and Dwayne Boyles at the linebacker position are solid players. Evans was very good. They did lose a lot of personnel to graduation in the defensive secondary, so there's going to be some new looks there, and again some transfers. T.J. Robinson coming from Rutgers, Matthew Hill coming from Auburn, Christian Williams coming from Miami, all first-year Bulls. Will Jones from Kansas State. So you can see they've got quite an injection of veteran talent in the defensive secondary. We'll see how they all coalesce and how they play together, especially at the beginning of the season.
Shifting over to the special teams, tell us what you can about the kick and kicker and punter phases, and then also the return game.
Well, I think a lot of those positions are kind of open at this point with players graduating and new players coming in. I think that's going to be an area to kind of watch and see during fall camp and see how it plays out. I would probably call a lot of those spots unsettled at this point. But again, I think there's great depth there, and I think they've got some options. It's just going to be a case of going through the fall practices and deciding who the guy is at each position. One
of the big topics this all season has been obviously NIL, name, image, likeness. What are your thoughts on that? And obviously much have been made, some of the NIL deals that have been struck down in Miami with that program. The Hurricanes really struck a deal that was very interesting with each athlete getting a nice little chunk of change. So what's the deal with USF? Had there been any interesting agreements thus far?
Well, it's something quite candidly that I'm not terribly involved in. I know USF was very proactive in preparing for that legislation to come through. And that they are advising student athletes about it. But beyond that, it's kind of not in my realm. It's just the way of the world in college athletics, and part of the changes we're all going through between that and conference realignment. It's been an interesting few weeks.
Taking a look at the schedule, Jim, Bulls open on a Thursday night, just like East Carolina does, traveling to Carter Finley Stadium to take on the Wolfpack, and then you have Florida coming to Tampa. You also have Florida A&M, and then you go to Provo to take on a very good BYU team. Talk about that tremendous non-conference schedule.
Yeah, it's going to be a challenge. I think it'll be good for them in the long run, but again, you gotta get your wins somewhere. So they're going to have to play very well even before the American Athletic Conference schedule kicks in. Florida will be fun. It'll be the first time they have come to Tampa to play the Bulls. First time the teams have met since 2010 in Gainesville. And of course, there'll be a huge crowd for that. So that should be fun. Last time the team went to NC State, they had a big win, 41-10 over the Wolfpack back in 2008. So some good history for USF there. And the Provo trip is going to be interesting. The Bulls have only gone to play in the state of Utah once in their history, and that was 20 years ago against Utah. They have not played BYU out there, although they did beat the Cougars in Tampa a couple of years ago. So it's going to be a lot of fun even before we get to the conference schedule.
Within the American, the Bulls get 4 out of their first 5 AAC games there at Raymond James Stadium, including Tulsa and Cincinnati, the 2 programs that played for the title a season ago. So an opportunity to get off to a solid start in the league.
Yeah, and if you look at last year when the team struggled so much, I mean, 1-8 is 1-8. Your record is the bottom line, and that was their record. But if you look at a lot of those games, especially in conference, a play here, a play there, and they win the ball game instead of taking the loss. So you hope that the improvements that they've made in the offseason can turn some of those around. And with such a young team, if you do capture a couple of wins early by playing at home, that can really change the mindset, change the confidence level. So with a young and relatively inexperienced team and a lot of new faces this year, those early home conference games might wind up being a pretty good advantage.
And final thing for you, Jim, over the last week to week and a half, one of the big topics has obviously been Oklahoma and Texas leaving the Big 12 for the SEC. That vote was just passed unanimously a day ago. So what, if anything, have you heard from the administration there at USF as far as, putting the best foot forward and getting that Bulls program into the best possible scenario to move into the future?
Well, I would suspect pretty much the same as every other school and conference in that situation. A lot of phone calls and a lot of discussion, and we'll see what happens. I don't think anybody can forecast it. Certainly not many people saw the Texas and Oklahoma story coming. So it certainly seems like a replay of a few years ago when one move kind of started a cascade of changes. I think it will this time as well, and whether that affects the American or whether it affects USF, still to be seen. But I'm sure there's a lot of positioning and a lot of discussion going on, not only at USF, but at other colleges and universities as well.
Yeah, no doubt about it, Jim. I really appreciate your time as always, and we hope you enjoy the remainder of your summer, the little bit that's left of it, and have an excellent call throughout the 2021 season. We look forward to catching up with you again down the road.
Sounds good. I appreciate it. Thanks.